If you ever have to ask a complete stranger for help without making a sound, pray that stranger isn't ordinary. Emma Carter had learned that survival sometimes meant becoming invisible. Invisible customers left better tips than difficult ones. Invisible bartenders kept their jobs. Invisible women made it home safely after midnight. For nearly 3 years, she had lived by those rules, pouring drinks with a steady smile, remembering regulars' favorite whiskey brands, and pretending not to notice the lonely stories hidden behind expensive watches and polished shoes. The Iron Lantern wasn't the kind of place tourists stumbled into. Tucked beneath an old brick building in downtown Chicago, it catered to wealthy professionals, celebrities who valued privacy, and powerful people whose names rarely appeared in newspapers despite owning half the city. Emma never asked questions. She worked the evening shift, collected her tips, and helped cover the medical bills that kept her widowed mother comfortable 2 states away. That was enough. Or at least it had been until tonight. Rain hammered against the narrow windows, blurring the glowing city lights into rivers of gold. Jazz drifted softly through the room while crystal glasses reflected warm amber light across the polished mahogany bar. Every stool was occupied except one near the far corner, where a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit sat alone. He had ordered nothing more than a single glass of red wine nearly 20 minutes earlier. He hadn't checked his phone once. He hadn't looked around the room. He simply watched the rain as though time itself had stopped for him long ago. Emma noticed him because everyone else seemed to avoid looking directly at him. Even seasoned executives unconsciously lowered their voices whenever they walked past his seat. It made no sense, yet somehow it felt completely natural. Before she could think more about it, another customer snapped his fingers against the counter. Another bourbon. His words were friendly enough, but his smile never reached his eyes. Emma filled the glass anyway. She had seen him twice before during late Friday nights. He always stayed too long. Always asked too many personal questions. Always acted as though the word no simply meant try again later. She slid the drink across the polished wood. Here you go. You getting off soon? Emma offered the same practiced smile she gave everyone. Still have a few hours left. Good. We can leave together. She laughed politely without answering. That usually worked. Tonight it didn't. He leaned closer. I'm serious. Her heartbeat quickened, though her expression never changed. Across the room, the manager conveniently became fascinated with inventory sheets. 2 security guards stood near the entrance, but neither looked in her direction. The music continued. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed. Somehow the busiest room in the building suddenly felt painfully lonely. Emma reached beneath the counter for a fresh cocktail napkin. Her fingers trembled only once before she steadied them. Don't panic, she reminded herself. Stay calm. Think. The customer continued talking, unaware that she wasn't listening anymore. Her attention had shifted toward the silent stranger sitting only 3 stools away. He still hadn't moved. He still hadn't acknowledged anything happening around him. Yet something about his stillness felt stronger than shouting ever could. Emma picked up a pen, pretending to update an order. Instead, she slowly wrote 2 simple words across the white napkin. Help me. She folded it once. Then, while reaching to collect an empty glass, she gently slid the folded napkin across the polished surface until it stopped beside the stranger's untouched wine glass. Her pulse thundered inside her ears. Maybe he wouldn't notice. Maybe he would ignore it. Maybe she had just made the worst mistake of her life. The stranger lowered his eyes toward the folded napkin. For several endless seconds he didn't touch it. The rain outside seemed louder. The jazz faded into the background. Emma barely remembered to breathe. Finally, with impossible calm, he unfolded the napkin and read the 2 handwritten words. Then, for the very first time that evening, he looked directly at her. His pale gray eyes held no panic, no confusión, no judgment, only an ancient, unsettling calm that made the entire room suddenly feel much colder, as though something invisible had quietly awakened beneath the ordinary noise of another Friday night. Emma forgot the sound of the rain the moment their eyes met. It was impossible to explain why. Countless customers had looked at her across this counter over the years. Some were kind, some impatient, some forgettable before they even walked out the door. But this man carried a silence that seemed older than the city itself. He did not glance at the napkin again. He did not ask what was wrong. He simply folded it once with careful precision and placed it beside his untouched glass of wine. The customer beside Emma laughed at something she had not heard. He leaned closer across the counter, invading the small space she relied on to feel safe. "You never answered my question." Emma forced another polite smile. "I am working. Not forever." His voice remained pleasant enough that no one nearby would notice anything unusual. That almost made it worse. She reached for another clean glass simply to keep her hands busy. Across the room, her manager looked away the instant their eyes almost met. The message was painfully clear. "Handle it yourself." The stranger finally moved. It was nothing dramatic. He simply lifted his wineglass and took one slow sip before setting it back onto the polished wood. Even that small motion somehow drew the attention of the bartender at the opposite end, who immediately stopped polishing glasses without realizing it. The stranger spoke without raising his voice. "Mississippi." Emma blinked. It took her a second to realize he was speaking to her. His voice was deep, calm, and carried the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "Would you recommend another bottle?" She stared for half a heartbeat before answering. "Of course, sir. Do you prefer something dry?" "I prefer honesty." The words seemed ordinary, yet they settled strangely in the air between them. Emma opened her mouth to respond when the other customer interrupted. "She is busy with me." The stranger slowly turned his head. His expression never changed. His face remained perfectly composed, almost unreadable, but something invisible shifted inside the room. The conversations around the bar softened. Laughter faded. Even the piano player missed a note before quietly recovering. Emma felt goosebumps rise along her arms despite the warm room. The stranger looked back toward her instead of answering the interruption. "Take your time," he said gently. "There is no reason to rush." Somehow those simple words slowed her racing heartbeat. She realized she had been holding her breath for several seconds. The customer beside her gave an awkward chuckle. "Friend of yours?" Emma shook her head immediately. No. That answer was true. She had never seen the stranger before tonight. Yet something inside her whispered that he already knew far more about her than he should. The customer pushed his empty glass forward. "Another one." Emma reached for the bottle, but before she could pour, the stranger quietly placed a crisp $100 bill beneath his own glass. "I would like to reserve her service for the next 15 minutes. Emma looked at him in surprise. That was not how bars worked. The customer beside her frowned. "Excuse me." The stranger never acknowledged him. 15 minutes, he repeated, his gray eyes resting on Emma with quiet certainty. "I believe she deserves at least that much peace." No one spoke. Even the manager looked frozen near the office door. Emma noticed something even stranger. 2 men in dark suits had entered through the front entrance without making a sound. They stood several feet apart, neither ordering drinks nor speaking to anyone. Their attention remained fixed on the stranger, waiting with remarkable patience, as though a single word from him could change the course of everyone's evening. The customer beside Emma suddenly cleared his throat. His confidence seemed to dissolve for reasons Emma could not understand. He glanced toward the silent men, then back at the stranger, as if trying desperately to remember where he had seen that face before. The stranger reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small black business card without any visible logo. He slid it toward Emma beside the folded napkin. "Keep this," he said quietly. "If tonight becomes more complicated than either of us would like, you will know exactly who to call." Emma looked down at the elegant black card. There was only a single silver crest embossed in the center, an ancient crown resting above a crescent moon. No phone number. No company name. Just the symbol. Before she could ask what it meant, the entrance doors opened once more, and every one of the silent men in black straightened at the exact same moment. The moment the entrance doors swung inward, every conversation inside the iron lantern dissolved into an uneasy hush. Emma looked up instinctively, expecting another group of wealthy guests escaping the storm. Instead, 6 men wearing identical black overcoats stepped inside with measured precision. None of them removed their coats despite the warmth of the room. None of them glanced at the menu or toward the empty tables. Their movements were calm, disciplined, almost rehearsed. The strange part was not their appearance. It was the reaction they inspired. The hostess, who normally greeted every guest with practiced enthusiasm, suddenly lowered her eyes and quietly stepped aside without speaking a single word. Even the manager straightened his jacket and instinctively took one respectful step backward. Emma noticed all of it within seconds. She also noticed that every one of the newcomers seemed to acknowledge only one person in the room: the silent stranger at the corner of the bar. He remained seated exactly as before, one hand resting beside his untouched wineglass, his expression completely composed. He did not wave. He did not nod. Yet the 6 men subtly inclined their heads before taking positions around the room without disturbing a single customer. It looked less like security and more like an invisible shield forming around him. Emma felt her curiosity growing stronger than her fear. Who was this man? The customer beside her seemed equally unsettled now. He glanced around the room, forcing a nervous smile. Some kind of celebrity? Emma quietly shook her head. I do not know him. The answer sounded less convincing this time, even to herself. She picked up another glass, trying to continue working as though nothing unusual was happening. Her hands were steady again, but only because the stranger's quiet confidence had somehow replaced panic with cautious hope. She reached for the register when the customer suddenly stood from his stool. Come outside with me for 5 minutes, he said softly. We can talk where it is quieter. Emma politely stepped back. I cannot leave my shift. His smile faded just enough for her to notice. You are making this more difficult than it needs to be. Before Emma could answer, the stranger finally spoke again. She already declined. His tone remained perfectly calm, almost conversational. You should respect her answer. The customer slowly turned toward him. This is none of your business. Tonight, the stranger replied. It is. The words were neither threatening nor angry. They carried the simple certainty of someone stating an undeniable fact. The room became strangely still once more. Emma noticed several customers quietly gathering their coats, not out of panic, but with the quiet urgency of people recognizing that something important was unfolding beyond their understanding. The customer laughed awkwardly, trying to recover his confidence. You think you own this place? The stranger looked at the rain sliding down the window before answering. No. A brief pause followed. I simply take responsibility when others choose not to. Emma felt those words settle heavily inside her. Her manager, who had ignored everything only moments earlier, suddenly hurried toward the bar wearing an anxious smile. Sir, he said respectfully to the stranger, if there is anything we can do for you this evening, please let us know. Emma stared in disbelief. Her manager barely remembered the names of his own employees. Yet he addressed this mysterious guest with unmistakable deference. The stranger offered only a courteous nod. Your bartender has handled herself with remarkable professionalism. The manager immediately turned toward Emma. Take as much time as you need. I will cover the bar. Emma blinked. During 3 years of employment, he had never once offered to replace her behind the counter. Not even when she had worked through a severe winter flu. Something was happening that everyone else seemed to understand except her. The customer looked around the room again. The 6 men in black had not moved an inch, yet their quiet presence seemed to erase every possible argument before it could begin. His shoulders relaxed. He reached into his wallet, placed several bills on the counter, and gave Emma a brief nod. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Without another word, he walked toward the exit and disappeared into the rain. Emma released a slow breath she had not realized she was holding. She expected relief to wash over her. Instead, uncertainty took its place. She turned back toward the stranger, intending to thank him properly. Before she could speak, one of the men in black approached with silent urgency and leaned close enough to be heard only by the stranger. The man's expression did not change, but his pale gray eyes lifted toward the rain beyond the glass. Then he quietly asked Emma a question that made her heart skip a beat. Miss Carter, has anyone ever told you that some people have been searching for you without your knowledge? Emma stared at him, convinced she had misheard the question. Searching for me? She repeated softly. The stranger held her gaze without blinking. Yes. His answer came with quiet certainty, as though there were no room for doubt. Emma forced a nervous smile. I think you have the wrong person. She laughed once, hoping to dissolve the strange tension gathering around them. I am just a bartender. That, he replied, is what you believe. Before she could ask what he meant, the man in the black overcoat stepped back into his previous position, his expression perfectly composed. Whatever message he had delivered remained private. The stranger reached for the black business card still resting beside the folded napkin. He turned it over and placed it back in front of Emma. For the first time she noticed tiny silver letters appearing beneath the embossed crest, as though they had always been there, hidden until now. There was only one word. Lucian. No last name. No title. Just a single name engraved with remarkable elegance. Emma looked up. Lucian. He inclined his head slightly. Names are enough when introductions happen at the proper time. She frowned, unable to decide whether he was joking. You still have not told me who you are. Not yet. Somehow that answer felt honest rather than evasive. The rain outside intensified, striking the windows in steady waves. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the skyline, briefly illuminating the room before fading again into warm amber light. Several guests quietly settled their bills much earlier than expected. They left without complaint, offering respectful nods toward Lucian as they passed. None of them attempted conversation. It was as though everyone instinctively understood that his evening belonged to something far more important than casual introductions. Emma noticed another curious detail. Every clock inside the bar displayed the same time, yet none of them had advanced during the last several minutes. She looked from the wall clock to the small clock above the register. 11:23. She could have sworn at least 10 minutes had passed since she slid the napkin across the counter. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. Still 11:23. Is something wrong? Lucian asked. Emma hesitated. The clocks. He followed her gaze toward the nearest one before offering a faint smile that barely touched his face. Sometimes people notice unusual things when they stop ignoring their instincts. His answer explained nothing, yet somehow it felt less confusing than it should have. Emma reached for the business card again, tracing the silver crest with one fingertip. It felt unexpectedly warm despite the cool room. Have we met before? She asked quietly. Lucian answered almost immediately. No. A brief silence followed. Then he added, but our paths were always going to cross. Those words lingered between them longer than either expected. Emma wanted to dismiss them as poetic nonsense, but something deep inside her refused. It felt as though an invisible thread had quietly tightened between two strangers who should never have known one another. A gentle chime echoed from the entrance as another guest stepped inside. Unlike everyone before, this woman paused the instant she crossed the threshold. She wore an elegant ivory coat despite the storm and carried herself with effortless confidence. Her silver hair framed a face untouched by age, and her pale blue eyes swept across the room until they landed on Emma. Surprise flickered across her features.
Genuine surprise.
She ignored every empty table and walked directly toward Lucian. Before speaking, she offered him a graceful bow that no ordinary business executive would ever give another person. Your Majesty, she said softly. Emma almost dropped the business card. She looked at Lucian, waiting for him to deny the strange title. He did not. Instead, he sighed almost imperceptibly, as though an inevitable secret had finally caught up with him. Lady Evelyn, he replied. I was hoping for another hour. The elegant woman glanced toward Emma with unmistakable curiosity. The council already knows, she said carefully. They know you found her first. Emma felt every word sink into the pit of her stomach. Found her. Not met her. Found her. She looked from Lady Evelyn back to Lucian, searching for an explanation that would make any of this reasonable. Instead, Lucian slowly stood from his chair. Every man in the black overcoat straightened simultaneously. The room fell silent once again. Then Lucian looked directly into Emma's eyes and spoke with calm sincerity. Miss Carter, I owe you the truth. But once you hear it, your life will never be ordinary again. Emma stood motionless behind the bar, her fingers still resting on the black business card. Every instinct urged her to laugh, to dismiss the impossible conversation as some elaborate joke created by wealthy people with unusual hobbies. Yet nothing about the room felt artificial anymore. Her manager remained unusually silent. The employees avoided looking toward Lucian. Even the rain outside seemed to fall with a quieter rhythm, as though the entire night had begun listening. "Your Majesty," Emma repeated under her breath, almost testing how ridiculous the words sounded aloud. Lucian met her uncertain gaze without arrogance or pride. If anything, he looked faintly disappointed that the secret had surfaced so soon. "I would have preferred you learned my name before my title," he said calmly. Emma folded her arms, searching his face for any sign of deception. "King of what?" she asked. "There are no kingdoms left." A faint smile crossed Lucian's face. "There are kingdoms that simply stopped announcing themselves." Lady Evelyn watched Emma carefully, her expression softening. "You have every reason to question what you are hearing," she said gently. "Most people would." Emma looked between them. "This is impossible." "Most truths are," Lucian answered. Before Emma could respond, another man in black approached from the entrance. Unlike the others, he carried no umbrella despite the heavy rain outside. Not a single drop of water touched his coat. He stopped several feet from Lucian and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "the eastern route has been secured. The vehicle is ready whenever you wish to depart." Emma frowned. "Depart?" Lucian nodded once. "You cannot remain here tonight." "Why not?" "Because the moment Lady Evelyn recognized you, others will soon do the same." Emma blinked. "Recognize me?" Lady Evelyn exchanged a brief glance with Lucian before speaking. "You are asking the correct questions." Emma placed both hands on the counter. "Then answer them." Lucian remained silent for several moments. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. 3 nights ago, something ancient awakened." Emma listened without interrupting. "It was not a person. It was not a creature. It was an oath." She frowned. "I do not understand." "Neither did we," Lady Evelyn admitted. "Not at first." Lucian slowly reached toward the folded napkin that still lay beside his empty wineglass. He unfolded it with remarkable care. The words "help me" remained exactly as Emma had written them only minutes earlier. "You believe you handed this message to a stranger?" Lucian said. "You did not." Emma stared at him in confusion. "Then who are you?" "Someone who has spent centuries waiting for a message that only one person could write." A chill traveled down Emma's spine. "That does not make any sense." "It should not," Lucian agreed. "Not yet." Lady Evelyn stepped closer to the counter. "Do you still have the necklace your grandmother gave you?" Emma's eyes widened instantly. She had never mentioned her grandmother. She had never spoken about the small silver pendant hidden beneath her uniform. Instinctively, she reached beneath the fabric and wrapped her fingers around it. The tiny crescent-shaped pendant felt warmer than usual. Lady Evelyn noticed the movement immediately. "She still wears it," she whispered. Lucian closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. There was unmistakable relief in his expression. "Then we still have time." Emma slowly pulled the necklace into view. It was old, slightly tarnished, and completely ordinary except for the tiny engraved crescent resting beneath a simple crown. Her breathing caught. The design matched the silver crest printed on Lucian's black card exactly. She looked from the pendant to the card and back again. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Lucian answered with complete honesty. "Because your family has been protecting that symbol for generations without ever knowing what it truly meant." Emma felt the room tilt beneath her feet. Every story her grandmother had dismissed as family folklore suddenly returned with startling clarity. The old warnings, the strange lullabies, the repeated instruction never to remove the necklace, no matter what happened. She had always believed they were comforting traditions from another era. Now she was no longer certain. Outside, thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline. One of the men near the entrance quietly touched an earpiece before looking toward Lucian with unmistakable concern. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "they have arrived sooner than expected. The council's envoys are already outside." Emma instinctively slipped the silver pendant back beneath her uniform as though hiding it might somehow return the evening to normal. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the rain outside. "The council?" she asked quietly. "Who are they?" Lucian glanced toward the entrance where the men in black had subtly shifted their positions. Their movements remained calm, but Emma sensed a quiet urgency. Beneath their discipline, "They are the oldest governing body of my world," Lucian answered. "They believe every ancient law exists for a reason," Lady Evelyn added gently, "and they do not appreciate surprises." Emma let out a nervous breath. "I am a bartender who can barely afford next month's rent. I am not anybody's surprise." Lucian looked directly at her. "That is exactly what makes tonight so extraordinary." The entrance doors opened without anyone touching them. A cold draft drifted across the room, carrying the scent of rain and old stone. 3 elegantly dressed figures entered together, each wearing long charcoal coats fastened with silver clasps shaped like intertwined branches. They appeared no older than 40, yet their composed expression suggested lives measured in centuries instead of decades. None of the remaining customers spoke. Several quietly stood and left their drinks unfinished, passing the newcomers with respectful silence. Emma noticed something else. Every employee inside the bar unconsciously stepped aside, creating a clear path toward Lucian. The 3 visitors stopped several feet away. The woman standing in the center inclined her head with flawless courtesy. "Your Majesty." Lucian acknowledged her greeting with a slight nod. "Counselor Celeste." Her pale green eyes shifted toward Emma for only a brief second before returning to Lucian. "We received confirmation that the ancient signal originated here." Lucian answered simply. "You received correct information." Counselor Celeste folded her hands calmly. "Then protocol requires that the human accompany the council until her identity has been properly verified." Emma looked between them in confusion. "Identity?" Lucian remained perfectly still. "She stays with me." No one raised their voice. No one argued emotionally. Yet the atmosphere inside the room immediately became heavier, as though invisible currents had begun flowing beneath every carefully chosen word. Another counselor, an older gentleman with silver hair, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, with respect, tradition exists to protect both worlds." Lucian's expression remained composed. "Tradition also teaches patience." "Patience is precisely why we are here," the older counselor replied. Lady Evelyn quietly stepped beside Emma. "Do not be frightened," she whispered. "They cannot force anything while he is present." Emma frowned. "Why does everyone keep talking as though I belong to someone?" Lucian immediately turned toward her. "You do not belong to anyone." His answer came without hesitation. "Not to the council. Not to me." He paused before adding quietly, "That choice has always been yours." Emma searched his face, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Before she could respond, Counselor Celeste reached into her coat and produced an antique leather folder sealed with dark crimson wax. She carefully opened it and removed a single yellowed page covered with elegant handwritten script. "There is one matter that concerns us all," she said. "The prophecy." Emma almost laughed from disbelief. "Now we have prophecies too?" Nobody else smiled. Counselor Celeste continued reading. "When the forgotten guardian seeks protection without knowing the throne, the ancient covenant shall awaken beneath the crescent crown." Emma felt her fingertips grow cold. Crescent crown. Her necklace. Lucian's crest. The business card still resting beside the napkin. Every symbol pointed toward the same impossible truth. "This document is more than 400 years old," Counselor Celeste continued. "Until tonight, we believed it described events that would never occur." Lucian slowly closed the folder before she could continue reading. "Enough." His voice remained calm, yet every person inside the room immediately fell silent. "Miss Carter has heard more than enough for one evening." Counselor Celeste regarded him carefully. "Then you already know what happens if the covenant has truly awakened." Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted toward Emma's pendant hidden beneath her uniform, and for the first time since she had met him, genuine concern crossed his otherwise composed face. Outside, another flash of lightning illuminated the rain-soaked street. Parked directly across from the bar, a line of identical black vehicles had quietly filled the curb. Emma counted 6 before. Realizing there were probably more hidden beyond the storm, she looked back at Lucian. You said my life would never be ordinary again. His pale gray eyes met hers with quiet honesty. Emma, he said softly, it already stopped being ordinary long before you walked into this bar tonight. You simply had not been told the truth until now. Emma tried to convince herself that she should leave. She could walk out the front door, ignore every impossible conversation, catch the late train home, and wake tomorrow believing this had all been an elaborate misunderstanding. The idea lasted only a few seconds. Deep inside, she already knew she would not leave. Too many questions had followed her for too many years. Why had her grandmother insisted they move every few years without explanation? Why had she refused to speak about Emma's parents beyond a handful of carefully chosen memories? Why had she always repeated the same sentence every birthday? When the right eyes find you, do not run from the truth. Emma had been 10 years old when she first heard those words. She had thought they were part of a fairy tale. Now they echoed through her mind with startling clarity. Lucian noticed the uncertainty in her expression. You are remembering something. Emma looked at him. My grandmother. Lady Evelyn smiled gently. Margaret Carter. Emma blinked. You knew her. Lady Evelyn lowered her eyes respectfully. No. But I knew of her. Lucian stepped closer to the counter, his movements calm enough that Emma never felt cornered. Your grandmother protected a promise she never fully understood. Emma slowly removed the silver pendant once more. She always said this belonged to our family. Lucian studied the small crescent beneath the crown without touching it. It belonged to your family because someone entrusted it to them 4 generations ago. Emma frowned. Who? Lucian answered with quiet certainty. My mother. Silence filled the room. Emma searched his face, waiting for him to admit this was another metaphor. He never did. That is impossible, she whispered. My grandmother was born in Ohio. She was, Lucian replied. Her ancestors were not. Counselor Celeste quietly unfolded another page from the ancient folder. Our records describe a guardian family that disappeared from Europe more than 150 years ago. They crossed the Atlantic carrying only a sealed crest and a promise that it would never fall into the wrong hands. Emma looked down at the necklace resting in her palm. It suddenly felt heavier than before. You mean my family has been hiding from someone? Lucian answered with painful honesty. Protecting something. There is a difference. The older counselor folded his hands behind his back. For generations, no one believed the guardian bloodline still existed. Lady Evelyn looked toward Emma with unmistakable warmth. Until tonight. Emma shook her head slowly. I do not understand why any of this matters. I have never done anything extraordinary. Lucian's expression softened. Exactly. She looked at him in confusion. Power attracts attention. Kindness rarely does. That is why your family survived. Those words settled inside Emma more deeply than anything else she had heard that evening. She thought about her grandmother volunteering at shelters without telling anyone. She remembered neighbors appearing at their door with homemade pies because Margaret had quietly helped them through difficult times. None of it had seemed important then. Now it felt like part of a pattern stretching back farther than Emma could imagine. One of Lucian's guards approached with respectful urgency. Your Majesty, the northern team reports increased movement across the district. Lucian nodded once. How many? More than expected. Counselor Celeste exchanged a worried glance with the older counselor. If they have discovered the guardian before the council completes its inquiry, tonight may become considerably more complicated. Emma looked around the room. Who are they? Nobody answered immediately. Lucian finally spoke. Not everyone who shares my world agrees on how humans should be treated. His voice remained calm, but Emma detected genuine concern beneath it. Some believe ancient promises have outlived their purpose. Emma instinctively closed her fingers around the pendant. And what do they believe? About me. Lucian held her gaze without hesitation. They believe anyone connected to the covenant could change the balance that has existed for centuries. Emma let out a slow breath. I cannot even explain my own life, let alone change someone else's. A faint smile appeared on Lucian's face. History rarely asks permission before choosing ordinary people. Just then, the silver crest engraved on Emma's pendant shimmered with a soft glow no brighter than moonlight. She gasped and loosened her grip. Every person in the room turned toward the tiny light. Counselor Celeste quietly closed her eyes. Lady Evelyn whispered something too softly for Emma to hear. Lucian did not look surprised. Instead, he looked relieved. "It has finally awakened," he said almost to himself. Emma stared at the glowing pendant, then back at Lucian. "What awakened?" Before he could answer, the lights throughout the entire building flickered once, then settled into an unnatural silence, while outside every black vehicle parked along the street switched on its headlights at the exact same moment. The soft glow from Emma's pendant slowly faded, yet no one in the room relaxed. The silence that followed felt heavier than any conversation. Outside, the long line of black vehicles remained motionless beneath the rain, their headlights cutting through the darkness like silent sentinels waiting for a signal. Emma looked from the windows back to Lucian. "Tell me the truth," she said quietly. "No more pieces. No more riddles." Lucian studied her for several moments before giving a slight nod. "Very well." He stepped closer, careful to leave enough space that she never felt trapped. Centuries ago, before cities stood where they do today, there were agreements that kept both our worlds from destroying one another through fear and misunderstanding. Those agreements were sealed by trust rather than power. Your family became the guardians of one of those promises. Emma listened without interrupting. "The pendant does not contain magic," Lucian continued. "It represents permission. Only its rightful guardian can awaken what has been sleeping." Emma looked down at the silver crescent resting in her palm. "And I somehow did that tonight?" Lucian answered with complete certainty. "Not when you touched the pendant." He gently placed the folded napkin beside it. "When you asked for help." Emma frowned. "That cannot be enough." "It was never the words," Lady Evelyn explained softly. "It was the choice behind them." Counselor Celeste quietly added, "The covenant responds only when someone chooses trust instead of fear." Emma stared at the simple handwritten message. 2 ordinary words. Nothing about them seemed extraordinary. Yet everyone around her regarded them as though they had changed history. "I only wanted someone to notice," she whispered. Lucian's expression softened. "And you chose a complete stranger." Emma slowly nodded. "I did not know who you were." "Exactly." Lucian looked toward the rain-covered windows. The covenant was designed to awaken only when kindness and trust appeared without expectation of reward. Emma felt another memory surface. Her grandmother had often said that character revealed itself most clearly when nobody knew your name. She had never understood why those words mattered so much. Now they echoed through the room as though Margaret herself had spoken them. One of Lucian's guards approached and handed him a small leather notebook recovered from inside a weatherproof case. Lucian opened it carefully before offering it to Emma. "Does this handwriting look familiar?" Emma accepted the worn notebook with trembling fingers. The first page contained elegant cursive writing faded by age. She recognized it immediately. "This is my grandmother's handwriting." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. She turned another page. Every line described ordinary moments. Helping neighbors after storms. Sharing food with strangers. Comforting frightened children. There were no stories of monsters or hidden kingdoms. Only quiet acts of compassion. Then she reached the final written page. Her breath caught. In the center, Margaret had written a single sentence. "If one day you must choose a stranger, choose the one who protects before he introduces himself." Tears gathered in Emma's eyes. She remembered her grandmother smiling whenever she spoke about kindness. She had never mentioned destiny, never once spoke of kings. She had simply lived according to those words. Lucian watched Emma close the notebook with gentle care. "She understood more than she allowed herself to say," he said. Emma looked at him. "She knew you." Lucian answered honestly. "Only once." Lady Evelyn smiled faintly. "It was many years ago, yet she greeted His Majesty exactly the same way you greeted him tonight. Without fear. Without knowing who he truly was." Emma felt the weight of coincidence disappear. None of this had happened by accident. The kindness that shaped her life had been quietly passed from one generation to the next. Counselor Celeste folded the ancient documents and looked toward Lucian. "The council's inquiry is complete." The older counselor nodded in agreement. "The guardian has awakened willingly. The covenant recognizes her." Emma blinked. What does that mean? Lucian looked toward the entrance where the rain had finally begun to soften. It means the council can no longer decide your future for you. He paused before continuing. Only you can. Before Emma could answer, every phone inside the bar vibrated at exactly the same moment. Employees, customers still lingering near the exit. Even the manager looked down in confusion. The screens displayed only one image, a silver crescent beneath a crown. Emma slowly reached for her own phone. The same symbol filled the screen, followed by a single line of text that made the entire room fall silent once again. The Guardian has been found. No one moved after reading the message. The glowing screen slowly dimmed, but the words remained etched into Emma's thoughts as clearly as if they had been carved into stone. The Guardian has been found. She looked around the quiet bar, expecting someone to explain what came next. Instead, every pair of eyes turned toward her. It was the first time in her life that being invisible was no longer possible. Emma lowered her phone and let out a slow breath. I never wanted any of this. Lucian nodded with complete understanding. Neither did those who came before you. She looked at the worn notebook still resting in her hands. My grandmother never told me. She promised she would not, Lucian replied. The greatest protection she could offer was allowing you to live an ordinary life, until the covenant chose its own moment. Emma glanced around the familiar room that had suddenly become unrecognizable. The polished bar where she had worked countless evening shifts. The shelves she had dusted every morning. The customers she had quietly served without expecting anything in return. Just hours earlier, this had been nothing more than another rainy Friday in Chicago. Now it felt like the final page of one life and the opening chapter of another. Counselor Celeste carefully closed the ancient folder and stepped toward Emma. The council acknowledges your freedom to choose. Emma frowned. Choose what? Whether you wish to walk away from our world, the counselor answered, or step into it willingly. Emma stared in disbelief. You mean I can simply leave? Yes, Lucian answered before anyone else could speak. No law binds you. No promise forces you. The covenant protects choice above all else. Lady Evelyn smiled warmly. That has always been its greatest strength. Emma looked at Lucian for a long moment. And if I leave? He answered without hesitation. You return to your apartment. You continue tending this bar or find another job. My people will quietly ensure your safety from a distance, and no one here will ever ask anything of you again. And if I stay? Lucian's pale gray eyes reflected the soft lights above the bar. Then I will answer every question you have. You will learn why your family protected the covenant for generations. You will discover why your grandmother trusted that kindness could outlast fear. Most importantly, you will decide your own place in a story that began centuries before either of us were born. Emma lowered her eyes to the silver pendant resting in her palm. For years she had worn it simply because someone she loved had asked her to. Tonight she finally understood that its greatest value had never been the metal itself. It represented every quiet act of compassion passed from one ordinary person to another. She thought about the moment she had slid a folded napkin toward a stranger because hope had seemed less frightening than surrender. She had not chosen the most powerful person in the room. She had chosen the only person whose calm made her feel safe. Everything else had followed from that single decision. Emma closed her fingers around the pendant and looked back at Lucian. You protected me before I even knew your name. Lucian's expression softened into the first genuine smile she had seen all evening. Because kindness deserves to arrive before explanations. Rain continued to fall outside, gentler now, washing the streets beneath the city lights. One by one, the black vehicles quietly departed, disappearing into the night until only Lucian's remained waiting at the curb. The tension inside the bar slowly dissolved, replaced by something quieter, almost hopeful. Emma reached behind the counter, removed her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it beside the cash register. Her manager watched silently before offering a small understanding nod. No words were necessary. She stepped around the bar and walked toward the entrance beside Lucian. Before opening the door, she paused and looked back one final time at the ordinary life that had carried her safely to this extraordinary night. Then she smiled, not because she knew what tomorrow would bring, but because for the first time she no longer feared finding out. Lucian opened the door. allowing her to step into the cool night air before following beside her. Neither of them hurried. Beyond the rain, the city stretched endlessly beneath the lights, filled with people who would never know how quietly history had changed inside a neighborhood bar. And somewhere beyond the clouds, an ancient promise had finally kept its word. Even the oldest kingdoms endure not through fear or power, but through the quiet courage of those who choose kindness when no one is watching.